Destin. All right, I'm going to record now. Hello, 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 everyone. It is another Wednesday at noon, and we are Global Business. For those that don't know me, I am Dr. Neva. The last name is Alexander, but I prefer to go by my first name. And today I am with another superstar because everyone that comes on my program, they are superstars in their own rights, right? So today we have Teresa. Ate a lot, and we're gonna talk about sports because you know what? Sports
Yes.
is a business, right? Like people don't think of it as sports is sports, but it is a business, and right, and with business comes certain technical issues. We will call it technical things that the players sometimes overlook and not see. So we're gonna dive right into it. But before we dive into that topic, let's get to know our guest, Teresa. Hi, Teresa. Welcome.
Hi. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be in this space and talking about one of my passions, sports, because I still think I'm an athlete.
And right, you know
Right.
what? You look like an athlete. You have the height, the posture, everything. So definitely. So, tell the audience a little bit about you for those that, will come across this video and have no clue. Who are you? What do you do?
Well, first, I'm a mom and a wife of two grown children. I'm empty nester, so I'm getting used to that, and it has given me an opportunity to really delve back into working with youth in the community. I've done it and have been doing it for the past 30 years, and being, as I mentioned before, I'm a former athlete. I don't compete anymore, but I'm around it in so many circles, not only with my children, my nieces and nephews, but with youth of the community. But being an athlete, you had an opportunity to see that you always had to be ready to perform. You definitely learned a lot of life skills, how to do team building, how to tap into different skill sets, how to work on the strengths and the not so strengths, but definitely to be driven to achieve the goal. And an athlete is going to always learn how to adjust, how to navigate, and how to transform to make sure that they are not only able to reach the goal, engage their team as a collective, but to be able to move forward and achieve it. And you want to win. Most athletes, we're not playing because we want to lose, oh, that's the nice thing. We want to win.
Definitely, we want to win. It's a competition. It is
That's right.
sports. But
Yes.
with that comes these questions, these issues, these contracts, these different things. Let's talk about it.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to college or semi-pro level, there's often, a lot happening behind the scenes that the
Hmm.
public they don't see it. So from your perspective, Teresa, what are some ethical concerns or red flags you have observed when it comes to, how athletes are treated, and
Hmm.
especially around things like contracts or players' protections?
Right. Especially now that we're in a day and age, because when I competed, there weren't these lucrative opportunities, though there were policies and there were governance, and the policies were allegedly robust. It still was an enforcement and not that many protections for athletes, not only to excel and to compete at higher levels, but also to gain revenue. We look at the Fab Five. They have demonstrated the power of sports, and as you mentioned, the business of sports. And now in the day and age that we're living in, there are what they call NILs, name, image, and likeness, that any athlete has an opportunity to gain, be they at the amateur level, youth, anywhere from, I say unfortunate because with that comes the exploitation. um, you have young athletes that can be as young as 4 or 5 or 6 if in fact they demonstrate in athletic, and they excel in athletes. But with that name, image, and likeness, because an athlete is looking to perform, looking for the prestige that is also around sports, to be it they be the person, the competitor, the player, all the individuals who are in charge of the competition, the prestige of it, and the glory. Because most athletes, as you know, I mentioned before, we want to win, and with that comes glory, and you with the social media status that you'll gain from it. So, with the name, image, and likeness, depending on the contract, sometimes there's language embedded in the contract. If you don't look at the fine print, there's this term that's used: the devil is in the details. If you
Mhm.
don't go through those details, the individual may very well find that they are not gaining the profit and being able to protect their intellectual property. And there are several situations out there, you can look at, unfortunately, with Odell Beckham Jr. When he
Mm.
was with the Giants, he was at the height of his career. But when he transferred, for whatever reasons, when that's a whole nother story, when he transferred, his contract was not as lucrative. I don't believe he can utilize his name. I'm going to have to go back and do the research again, but we don't hear from him now. Does that mean he
Mm.
was any less of an athlete? But if that can happen to a professional athlete, what's happening to those athletes that are at the college level and who are still engaged in amateur sports? And we see that you mentioned again, I'm going to say sports is a business. Youth sports is over a $30 billion industry. So who's
Right.
in it? Who are the gatekeepers? And if we look at when you talk about the ethics of sports, I call it the P factor. We want to look at the people. We want to like to see who the gatekeepers are. We want to look at the prestige, the glory, the power, the profit. We're talking about 30 billion dollars. We're going to look at the practices. What are the policies? Most entities will either have a policy or a practice, but there's always a risk factor when there's not an alignment to ensure that there's compliance. We can still have fun. We can still make a profit. But how do we do this? There's a better way.
Wow. So the people, profit, um, policy,
Right.
prestige.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So, you know, one of the things that do you think, well, I think, let me just start there, like individuals, like they miss in these contracts. Why do you think they miss it? Like they're
They
not
don't know
seeing
what
these things.
they don't know what they don't know. And again, our country, especially where we are now, and COVID, post COVID, we get to see the disparities, the inequities. So, and it is based on a socioeconomic factor. Communities that are not, um, that are divested, that
Mhm.
where resources have been pulled or blocked, they're not going to have access to those individuals or protection so that they are not predators. People don't know what they don't know. We can't fault people for that. If they don't know, if they haven't been exposed, if there's no protections in place, no guardrails to defer or to as barriers to block those predatory actions, then they are vulnerable. So, what laws need to be put in place to protect the vulnerable? What advocate organizations are there out there to protect the vulnerable? And how do we communicate and educate and empower so that individuals do know how to protect their intellectual property? Because that has always been an asset in Black and Brown communities. We may not have much real estate, and we see the inequities and the continuation and the enlargement of the wealth gap, but we do have
Right.
intellectual property.
Right. And do you think there's a difference between, because, one of the things that I do, is with woman empowerment, right? And I know you mentioned earlier where we are, yes, United States, but this is global business. So I'm knowing that others in other parts of the world will be listening, and some of these stuff definitely apply to them. And
Mhm.
especially when, the practice where an international is now playing in another country, right?
Exactly.
So
Yes.
that would be a factor. And
Mhm.
them not knowing the law or anything, or even when it comes to, I may think, could be wrong, male players versus, how women players are treated. Do you have any recommendations that you would say to, someone from internationally or a woman or that they should look out for? Anything at
Take
all.
the time to read the contract. Whatever you don't know, get with someone who does know. That's something that my business, I'm in the line of business for, to definitely help you review your contract. Let's look at the compliance piece. What is the assessment? And get with individuals and in a group where we can have these discussions as a round table, because each one can teach one. But when you don't know, get with professionals who know. Get with an attorney. Do not accept the recommendations of the party that's to the contract with you to review. Have to, I'm sorry, excuse me, a referral from their attorney. You want
Mhm.
someone who is non-biased, who is not connected with that entity. And if there's a
Mhm.
rush and there's a deadline that is pressing, then maybe you don't need to enter that contract, because
Right.
they'll hold the carrot in front of you and dangle the coin, and that's where we miss it. Take the time, step away, come back. And if you decide that you don't want to come with my company, Aid and Vision, there are other companies out there. Would love to have you. Would love to sit down and talk to you, see how we
No,
can
we
we can
want
help
them to
you.
come to you,
Right,
Teresa.
right.
Yes, yes,
Eh,
yes, yes, yes. And by the way, guys, if you are listening to us live on YouTube, I'm not on YouTube too, but you're able to, it's live. So I'm not able to respond if you have a question, but definitely we'll get back to you. But you are able to join our weekly live podcast where you can ask questions, just register with us. And of course, Nevalliance, you see the logos. That's the way you spell the website name. So you could definitely join the conversation. So back to you, Teresa. What do you believe organizations or teams often overlook when it comes to setting up fair, transparent practices for their athletes? And how can a consultant like yourself
mhm.
help bring clarity and structure to those situations?
With sports being a business, any organization is driven by the money, the profit, the bottom line. With that, there's a certain risk and liability that an entity will, that gap, you run the risk of falling into that gap or tripping over that gap if you are not assessing to ensure that your practices and your policies are in alignment. Most organizations will only make these changes once a lawsuit is filed or there has been an infraction. But there are preventative ways that it can be done so that you don't risk your finances. Why throw out $1 million to a lawsuit or 10 million when you could have kept it, invested it, and ensure it? It takes some navigation. It can be a little challenging, but if you want to preserve your revenue, your assets, and your resources, it's a matter of doing that assessment piece. And those are things that my company can do, will do, and that's what I have been in the business of doing for at least over 25 years. That compliance and assessment piece, but you can still ensure that your entity is profitable, but it is also a safe place for an athlete to be able to compete at that level with you. And there are some organizations that are doing it successfully.
Thanks, Teresa. So, guys, just to let you know, we have, of course, Neva Lines, learn more about us by visiting our website. We have some upcoming events that I'd like to put in at this moment. We have on August 6th, the Black Business Month Mixer, and that is at Hofstra University. I also have in September the International Women's Leadership Retreat, and that will be in paradise, I like to call it, in
Nice.
Jamaica. So, yeah, guys, it's on September 22nd to the 26th, and September is actually my birthday month. So, I'm going to be celebrating right through. So, guys, if you want to join, just reach out to us. So, Teresa, yeah,
Yes.
um, you started your consultant company, right? And with, you know, Nevalliance, we're very much into, again, one woman empowerment, leadership, or teaching individuals how to lead and
Mhm.
lead in their business, right? So helping them to get on that stage for people everywhere to know what they do. So every consultant has a mission behind what they do, your why. What inspired you to take your experience and build a firm that helps organization to do right by, for this conversation, athletes, but do right by individuals?
For over 20 plus years, I worked in an agency where I enforced the law and oftentimes wondered why would we see the repeat offenders or entities and organizations that continue to have complaints filed against them. And I often wondered, where did leadership stand? Were they comfortable with how possibly management was operating? Or they just did not know how to make sure that they were no longer engaging or had measures in place to ensure that they were not engaging in practices that put their company at risk and susceptible to liability. So with gathering, on my own, though it may some of it may be anecdotal, but from the readings from the Harvard Business Review and other established resources and networks, it comes from leadership. What is
Mhm.
leadership communicating? And I wanted to be a part of the process to help leadership in their messaging with their strategic plan on what they were communicating to the organization, to middle management, to the community, and their other stakeholders that are involved in this, and possibly industry partners, because it does have a ripple effect. I would love to say and think that we here in New York are not affected by, here you're going to Jamaica. We're not affected by what goes on in Jamaica. Right now, we're living in a global society. And how do we build so that, yes, there can be profit, but profit cannot come and should not come at the expense of the disparagement or inequities of the vulnerable, of a particular group of people, or of anybody. And how do we do that? What's the mix for that? And it can happen, but it's important that there's a strategic plan, and that companies, when they do their compliance and assessment, avoid the gap, avoid going against policy.
Right. And and you made it quite simple, but just to make people understand a little better, when you talk about leadership, you talk about being ethical, ethical practices, right?
Mhm.
And you said something just now that strike a chord, like, you know, as far as getting, I would put it, rich off of the vulnerable. Apparently, individuals feel some, not everyone, but there are individuals who that's how they get rich. That's how they make their money. And it's unfortunately been a practice for years,
Mhm.
right? And because they know they can get away with it, they do it. But because you could get away with it doesn't mean it's right, right? So I'm glad that you're in a business that makes sure there is some accountability
Right.
for individuals and their actions, right? So, Teresa, if you, let's change the topic a little bit, but if
Yes.
you had the opportunity to sit down with leaders of major sports organizations tomorrow, what's one policy or practice you'd like to see, change immediately to better protect the players? And we're gonna, these players they're vulnerable because most of the time, they're just thinking either, feed my family, support
Right.
myself,
Right.
right? So sitting down with these, and because these sports guys, again, they're in business while you're
Mhm.
playing and hurting and getting injured. They're in
Right.
business. So
Right.
yeah, let's talk about it.
I'm going to segue into this a bit, and then I'm going to come back.
Mhm.
There's a We are in an environment where we have at least maybe four generations in the workplace at the same time. And our younger generations, our Gen Zers, they are human people. They are about how the treatment of people, the fairness of people. And with sports, if we're going to market, if you're going to be successful and market to them, people want to know a story. People want to hear a successful story. And that generation, they want to know that your Steph Curry's of the world. I'll use him because he helped to change the whole game of basketball. Everybody's shooting a three. Even the 3-year-olds are shooting the 3-pointers. And that's the impact that that generation has. So to tell that story, how are you going to engage your athletes? Because that's your most valuable asset. Let's hear their stories. Let them speak well about how their treatment. We have a vulnerable population because women's sports now is finally getting its due with your Angel Reese's of the world. And with that, with a female athlete who intends to either be a mom or a wife, or a single mom or wife, or someone who may very well assume the custody of children, accommodations have to be made. And we've seen how big businesses, I'm going to call it because it's a true story. She speaks about it. Nike has been in a newspaper because they have not accommodated their athletes, their track runners, who were at childbearing, not only childbearing age, but who became when the process of having a child and pregnant, and how they lost revenue and resources and endorsements. So when these stories come out more, and with this younger generation, who has the buying power to make sure that your industry, because the college sports and youth sports is looked to grow in 2030 by another 20 million to, I mean, $20 billion. And who's paying for that? That means this younger generation is doing it. So if you want to appeal to them more, and to definitely make sure that you lock in on and secure the bag of your 30 of your percentage of that 30 to 40 billion-dollar industry, tell these stories. Keep your athletes engaged. Treat them right so that when they tell their stories, you have that market and you're able to reach that demographic population. People feel that compliance comes at the risk of funding, and they don't want to do it. But if you address this in the beginning, you'll
Mhm.
be able to save and not give up 10% of your $40 billion industry. And 10% of 40 billion is how much? That's lost revenue.
For sure, for sure. Thank you, Teresa, for shedding some light. Guys, if you again, Nevalliance, it's behind me. You see the logo. That's how you reach and get in touch with me. But Teresa, how can one find you?
You can definitely email me. My website is under construction, www.adavision.com. Or you can email me at t.adalot@adenvision.com.
Yes, yes, yes. All right, guys, this was another great episode of a global business touching on sports. I don't think I've ever talked about sports or not in this setting anyway, but it was great. Got some great information. And, guys, if you are a superstar in your own right and you would love to be on Global Business, feel free to contact us. Or if you want to just listen in and join the conversation, you're able to do that too. And check out our upcoming events and our resources. And yeah, that's it. Until next time. Thank you. Bye bye.